Hey guys, welcome back to an interesting video on Wild Rift. So today we are back with yet another tier list for the latest patch 6.0D, and I'm thinking that it's likely that this patch is going to last all the way until the middle of April, which is where patch 6.1 is going to come out. So patch 6.0D is probably going to be sticking around for some time because I doubt there's going to be a 6.0E. But anyways, there have been a couple of champion changes, quite a number, but nothing too big in terms of like items or runes. Of course, minor changes here and there. But let's get started with the top lane, right? So since our last tier list, we had the addition of Gnar and a lot of buffs and nerfs to a lot of champions in the top lane. So Jax didn't really get affected, so I still think Jax is kind of up there. Just in terms of his ability to split push, his ability to carry, and fights and side lanes, and everything's kind of just all good. So I still have him up in the S plus tier. Now I put Gnar up in the S plus tier personally. I personally think that at this point in time, Gnar is actually in a really strong state. It's just that majority of people are not playing him optimally in terms of managing his rage before team fights and things like that. But I do have many games where I have played where Nars who do manage their rage properly get their mega in important team fight, get like a 4 to 5 man ult, and this has happened and turn a losing game into a winning game, both on my team and the enemy team as well. So Nar definitely has a lot of team fight and carry potential. Even his mini form, in my opinion, is really strong. I mean, I've seen mini Nar 1v1 an enemy ADC, and win or come very close to winning as well. So I do think that he's really good. Now Wukong has gone, I think, more than one round of buffs, and the latest patch buffs have just kind of pushed him over the edge. If you guys have seen Wukong in the Baron lane, he's actually really strong right now, and also really good in team fights. And then of course we have Renekton as well, who also got multiple rounds of buffs, and I think that once again they've kind of pushed him over the edge, where I think Renekton is now in a very strong state, and he doesn't really have a lot of bad matchups. Majority of matchups in the Baron lane are really good for him, and if you're good at him, you can kind of dominate the lane, snowball from there, and take over the rest of the game. Now Ornn, I think at the current moment, is the best kind of pure tank option. He's incredibly tanky, of course, gets bonus tank stats, can buy out of base and allow allies to do so as well. A lot of CC, a lot of tankiness, just what you want in your top laner. Now Bessa has gone a couple of rounds of nerfs. I still think she's a really strong champion, which is why she's at the top of S tier. And Rumble is a little bit of a mystery, right? Because he didn't really get like nerfed too much, or nerfed at all actually, but I do still think he's a very strong champion. But it's just that in the games that I see, he's just not really making a very big impact, which can only lead me to believe that people are not playing him optimally, especially in terms of putting down the ulti, which is really difficult to aim in Wild Rift. But I do still think he's in a very strong spot, but given that he's been out for quite a long time and he's not really carrying games like what I expect, I have to knock him down from the S plus tier to the S tier. Mordekaiser did get a bunch of buffs. Um, Actually, he got nerfed on his ulti as well, but they did kind of compensate him, so I still think he's in a really good spot in the Baron lane. I moved Camille down from the S plus tier to the S tier. I think I overestimated her power a little bit. Don't get me wrong, she is still strong, but she's not as strong as I kind of imagined. And I've also knocked like Singe and Maokai down because although I still think that they are really strong, I think that after getting a couple of rounds of nerfs on both of them, I do think that other top laners are kind of starting to outshine them by just a little bit. So I have moved them down just by a little bit. So the rest of the tier list pretty much remains the same. So we're going to move into talking about the jungle. So in the jungle role, quite a number of changes as well. Now something that hasn't changed is Amumu is still at the top of the food chain. Amumu of course is just still an incredibly strong jungler, really decent clear, really great ganks with all his CC, really insane team fight with his ultimate, and even though you're building full tank, you still do a decent amount of damage, and is just overall just the best jungler far and away. Now Hecarim, play rate has dropped tremendously, but honestly he's still a very strong champion. For people who can play Hecarim, which is a kind of easy but not that easy kind of champion, he is still really strong. I still think Vi is the best pure ganking jungler. Of course, Amumu is kind of a ganking jungler as well, but I think Vi is kind of more traditionally what you think of as a ganking jungler. I think she is insane with all of her CC and her lockdown, can easily get kills in lane, or not in lane, but when she ganks, and just really good at getting herself and her teammates ahead. Lee Sin goes back up to the S plus tier simply because other champions have gone worse. So as a result, Lee Sin is always going to be like high S tier, or in the S plus tier. Lee Sin's always kind of going to be a strong jungler unless they nerf him to the ground. And Mbessa, I actually think, is really still great in the jungle despite the nerfs that she's gone. As a matter of fact, I actually first timed Mbessa in the jungle in a ranked game because the only jungler I really play other than like Mila is basically gonna be Jarvan, and Jarvan got picked by the enemy team. So I decided to first time Mbessa because I've been the victim of Mbessa a lot of the time. And I basically carried the game on Mbessa. And I just destroyed the enemy team, even though it was literally the first time I was playing her, aside from trying her out in the practice tool. So definitely still think Mbessa is really strong, like with the ulti to lock someone down and with the chase potential on her passive. The nerf to the damage on her passive and stuff does hurt a little bit, but I still think she's great. And I think that personally, I think jungle is better than top lane for Mbessa because I feel that with the jungle you can gank lanes and get leads, whereas in the top lane it's not so easy to solo kill your opponent 1v1. Now, I've dropped Echo down from the S plus tier to the top of S tier. Reason being is that he did get some nerfs, but the nerfs are not horrible, right? The percent health damage on his W definitely hurts, and the jungle clear also hurts. Jungle clear speed also hurts. But the thing is that Echo is actually still incredibly strong. So he does move down a little bit, but don't get me wrong, he is still an amazing pick you can find for the jungle. So I've added Nar. I moved up Wukong, obviously, because Wukong has gotten the buffs, but I think it benefits Baron Lane a lot more than jungle. And I moved up, I've added Nar into the tier list at the bottom of S tier. Now, Nar, as I mentioned in the Baron Lane video, of course, he is really good in terms of team fights when he gets his mega, and when people start to master the rage management, I think it's going to be insane. His jungle clear is really decent, and there's no reason why you can't play him in the jungle. Like a lot of other champions that are not traditionally junglers but can be played in the jungle. Um, and aside from that, taking a look at the rest of the tier list, I've moved Graves up a bit because he's gotten multiple rounds of buff. So I think that Graves should be a lot better now, but I don't think Graves is ever going to be that amazing of a jungler unless he does insane damages, right? There was one point in time where Graves was the best jungler on the Rift simply because he did way too much damage and he got nerfed many times until he was weak, right? So at this current stage, his clear speed should be faster and he should be doing more damage. However, the caveat to this is I haven't actually really seen Graves being played. So I cannot say for sure that he is better now, but just in theory, he should be better, which is why I moved him up the tiers a little bit. But as a disclaimer, I haven't actually witnessed it myself. So this is just kind of what I feel from the changes that I see. But with that out the way, let's move on to the mid lane. Okay, so now onto the mid lane. As you can see, I still have Echo, or not still, but I now have Echo at the top of the tier list, despite the fact he just got nerfed, because the main big nerf is really on the jungle clear speed. And honestly, in mid lane, you can still insta-clear the wave with like 1Q, and go off roaming and getting yourself a lead. So in mid lane, really the only nerf that hit him is the W missing health damage, but that's not too bad, and I still think Echo is really insane. I mean, we've spent the last couple of patches getting one shot from Echo, so you guys will probably know what I'm talking about. Victor, the next up, the control mages are still in insane positions. Victor, Orianna, Syndra are all still insane. Not too strong in the early game, but mid and late game, they become powerhouses once they've scaled a little bit, and they just do insane damages, right? And the newest addition, of course, is the Corki rework. Now, of course, as I mentioned in my numerous Corki videos, he's gotten his AD per level buffed, his base AD buffed, and his ult buffed, and at this point in time, he is really strong, right? And Corki is a pure damage kind of champion, right? You barely have anything that's useful on Corki. You have a little bit of mobility on the W, a little bit of shredding on the E, and a little bit of poke, but he's pretty much full damage, right? So he's really going to be good when his damages are good. And at this current point in time, his damages are indeed good, which is why I've kind of put him in the bottom of S plus tier. As a result, Lissandra has to move down. She hasn't gotten any worse, but other champions like Corki and Echo have gotten better, which is why she basically has to move down to kind of make way, just in comparison. And aside from that, looking at the rest of the tier list, I moved Heimerdinger back up to S tier because after he got many rounds of nerfs, I kind of thought that he was weak, but I've played Heimerdinger mid myself, and I actually think he's not really that weak at all. In laning phase, he kind of just neutralizes the lane just by putting down his turrets, and there's not much you can really do to him. And if you fight him in his turrets, you can actually get solo killed by Heimerdinger in lane, but it's sort of the kind of like a champion knowledge check where basically the enemy laner has to know they can't fight Heimerdinger in his turrets, and they just have to play patient and just clear wave and let Heimerdinger clear wave, and they can't really fight him in the turrets, right? So if they don't know how Heimerdinger works, they're likely to die because they're likely to fight you in lane and they're likely to die to your turrets. But if they know what they're doing, they can pretty much be in just as safe a lane as you. Of course, Heimerdinger can also get push and roam from time to time, so he also has that benefit. But in general, I do think Heimerdinger is pretty strong. Now, I've moved Asol down from S tier to A plus tier because honestly, I've seen Asol in a couple of my games and I haven't really seen him be very useful whatsoever. So no real reason for me to leave him in S tier. Now, Irelia did get the adjustments to make her early game weaker and her late game stronger. I think this actually benefits mid lane Irelia way more than the jungle, not jungle, way more than the top lane Irelia, because in top lane, nerfing her early game is not very good because she's already struggling to kill people in top lane, and nerfing the early game is only going to make it worse. Whereas in the mid game, she can kill like squishy champions like mages just fine. So in essentially now her late game is getting buffed and her early game is getting nerfed. So actually this benefits her mid game, not mid game, benefits her mid lane, and should make her better, right? So I moved her up to the A plus tier. Now Annie did get a pretty big buff this patch as well, but she stays in the A tier mostly because ever since this patch, I have not seen a single Annie, so I cannot really verify if she has gotten better or not. In theory, she should be, but in other theory, there are a lot better picks than Annie, because Annie has pretty short range. She doesn't have a guarantee hit on her Q, unlike in PC where it's point and click. So I don't really see why Annie would be picked a lot, which is kind of why no one is really playing Annie at the moment, right? But if people were to play Annie, would she be good? I'm not very sure. We'll have to kind of see. But with that said, let's talk about the ADC role. It is pretty much every tier list video, but of course as an ADC main, this is my favorite one to talk about, and I've completely revamped my ADC tier list from top to bottom, as I very often do, this being my main role and me having the strongest opinions on this particular role. So, I've completely scrapped the entire tier list. I've remade one from scratch and placed the champions where I think they should go. And essentially, I think in the current meta, picking anything in like the A plus tier or above you'll be fine. Even A tier champions are kind of okay, but I wouldn't really recommend picking anything below A tier unless it's a specific counter matchup. So let's kind of go through it. So Vera, Sivir, and Corki are the best ADCs at the moment. Now Corki, I've kind of covered why he's good in the mid lane. Same reasons in the ADC role. It's just a different role, but same reasons. Now Sivir is really amazing simply because she is able to bounce boomerangs off the front line onto the back line. And in this current meta, there are a lot of frontline champions for the most part, so it's really easy for her to just deal insane amounts of damage. You guys will see from my Sivir videos that I've released, and I believe I have another Sivir video coming up soon if I'm not mistaken, if it's not already out, the 60k damage one. We can really see how it looks like you're doing nothing but you're completely destroying people. And Varus, I think, is the best ADC because he's the most versatile. He can build lethality on hit, crit, AP, whatever you need. He can build. He has long range. He has grievous wounds in build. He has percent health damage against tanks in build. He has a good teamfight CC ultimate. He pretty much has everything you want. The only thing you don't have is mobility, which you can of course solve with Ghost and Flash or Protobelt or whatever else you need, right? So Kai'Sa I still think is an amazing ADC. The only issue with Kai'Sa is that I don't really think he's on the same level right now as the S plus tier ADC. So I moved her down a peg, but she's pretty much in between the S tier and the S plus tier. I think Kai'Sa is really, really insane. Of an ADC. Great against tanks and squishies alike with like the same build. Also can build on hit, crit, or AP, same as Varus, so also very versatile. Now, Ezreal did get a triple buff this patch. He got a buff to himself in terms of his AD ratio and other stats. He got a buff to press the attack, and he also got a buff to mana bune. So he moves back up to the S tier because I've played Ezreal, and you guys will see from the video that's already been released. And I've also played against Ezreal. I do think he's in a really decent spot, but of course the main issue with Ezreal is he doesn't have amazing wave clear, and he's not the greatest carry if your entire team is kind of feeding, right? He's not that kind of ADC that can bring back a feeding team, whereas someone like Varus, Kai'Sa, Zeri, or Jinx kind of can because they're hyper carries. So Xayah still an absolutely amazing ADC, but the only real issue with Xayah is you have to play her into good matchups. You don't want to play Xayah into a full range team, she's going to be pretty useless, but playing her into an engage or melee team, she becomes like S plus tier. So the only reason why she's not there at the moment is because she's a little bit more situational, but even into like a bad team comp, I think she's still decent, just not great, right? And MF, currently is just really great. Pretty much in lane, she pretty much either wins lane or is neutral in lane against pretty much anybody. Even if she's against like a Draven, she can still neutralize the Draven lane just by poking him out. Against Caitlyn, she's fine. So pretty much she doesn't lose lane to anybody, and she does a really good amount of damage, in all stages of the game. So MF is now kind of back in the meta. I mean, she has been back in the meta for quite a while now, but she is really great, right? So next up we have Zeri. Now Zeri, I think, aside from maybe Kaisa, is probably the best hyper carry. And when I say that, I'm talking about like versus Jinx and Tristana and Caitlyn, things like that. I think Zeri is probably your best option. Obviously, good mobility, good amount of damage. Lucian does burst people down, and you've seen me try numerous Lucian builds across all my videos. I've been playing Lucian a lot this season, and I think Lucian is in a really really decent spot. Can win lane and burst down people, and decent in the mid lane game as well, just one-shotting people for the most part. Of course, he struggles a little bit against tanks, which is kind of why what pulls him down a little bit, but of course that's kind of how he's balanced. If he was good against both tanks and squishies, he'll be way too OP, right? So that kind of does make sense. Now Ashe is really good against teams with low mobility, and basically any team that doesn't have an assassin to dive you. Ashe is like basically S plus tier, but of course just in general Ashe is going to be in the A plus. Really good against tanks and champions that don't have a lot of mobility because of her slows and her ability to kite. Of course she has a ton of utility as well. And Jinx, I think, is just the worser version of like Kaisa and Zeri, and the main reason for that is that Jinx really needs to get a reset in the team fight to kind of go online. Right? If she doesn't get a reset, she's not really that useful. Even when she does get a reset, sometimes you are not able to chain resets, which is what Jinx is supposed to be able to do. But sometimes she just doesn't do that much damage. Right? I've been playing a lot of Jinx recently, so I think I've got a good grasp on Jinx. And same goes for Tristana. Right? I played a lot of Tristana recently, and I kind of think that she's in a decent spot. Like I said, as I said, right, A plus, not A plus, A tier champions are still kind of okay to pick. Tristana, I think now her early game has gone a lot weaker, but her late game is actually pretty good, right? She's a really good hyper carry where when you get to like 3, 4, 5 items, she does really insane, but she's just not very useful in the early to mid game because they've nerfed her early game a lot over the last couple of patches, so she's definitely taken down a peg. Now, Jhin, my favorite ADC personally, but unfortunately not that amazing in the meta. He's really only good into full squishy teams where you can burst them down very easily and, take over the game. But the issue with Jhin is that if you're playing into a full squishy team, you have champions like Lucian, MF, or even like Vitaly, Varus, who are just a cut above him. So he's still a decent pick, but they're just better picks. But of course, if you're a Jhin main, then Jhin still is pretty much serviceable. And then we have Vayne. Now, Vayne is only really good into full tank teams, right? But again, you have the same kind of issue where Varus and Sivir are so good into full tank teams. Like, would you pick Vayne? Like, I would rather pick like Sivir into a full tank team than Vayne, because I think with Sivir I can build like Black Cleaver and a more reminder, and I can shred them just as easily, as Vayne. I think Vayne is more fun to play, but I think Sivir or Varus are probably the better picks compared to Vayne. Now, Draven, I actually think that Draven is okay if you're great at Draven, but just in general, I think that Draven needs to have extremely high damage for him to really have a lot of value. And at this current point in time, I think he's balanced to a point where he does decent damage, not too little, not too much. So he isn't that great, right? Because he needs to be doing too much damage to be great, right? And Caitlyn, this is perhaps a little bit controversial, but personally, from where I'm standing, I really don't think Caitlyn is that good. I've played many games of Caitlyn. I just think her damage is lacking, right? I think that a lot of champions just like everybody above her pretty much just does more damage than her. And Caitlyn is the kind of person that needs to do enough damage to destroy lane and then get ahead and take over the game, right? But her damage is not really even that high, so it's really hard for her to destroy people in lane. And I just think Caitlyn's not in a good spot right now. And who else is not in a good spot? It's going to be Kalista and Samira. In this current meta, they are just not doing very well. There's too much tanks, too much CC, and Kalista and Samira struggle with that. And Neela, I've covered her in the updated complete guide. She's really only good into specific team comps where there's a lot of melee champions, a lot of auto attack champions, and those are really the only places where she is going to be good in as a counter pick. Now, Twitch, obviously, you don't want to be picking Twitch for the most part because pretty much unless you really love Twitch's playstyle of the invisibility and the poison and etc. There are just better options for everything. Right? Invisibility, Vayne, and like Kaisa are better. Hyper carries, of course, you have Tristana, Jinx, Zeri, Kaisa, etc. So really, Twitch doesn't bring a whole lot to the table. except his unique playstyle of the long-term invisibility and being able to go for some sneaky plays, right? But aside from that, Twitch doesn't really bring a lot to the table, so he's not in a great spot right now. Of course, farming Senna, never really going to be a good thing. But all that covered, now we can finally move on to the supports. So for the support role, not too much has changed, but some things have changed. So I still think Nautilus and Pike are the two best engaged supports. I still think Lulu is the best enchanter support in terms of boosting your damage, shielding, and shielding you. And I've actually moved Lux back up into S plus tier because I played against a lot of Luxes recently, and I found that even when she builds like support, or even when she builds like non-damaging items, she still does a lot of damage. And when she builds damaging items, she just one-shots you the moment you get hit by a root. Now, of course, this is a little bit better, the fact that cleanse has come out and you can actually cleanse her root, but I still think her damage is really high, whether she builds damage or not, which is just a problem, right? So I've moved Blitzcrank down from the S plus tier, mostly because I feel that previously I thought he was insane with Roll Trap and things like that, which he still is, but the main issue with Blitzcrank is that he can be countered by Team Comp. And what I mean by that is, if you're playing against an engager, you really don't want to hook them in, right? I don't want to be hooking in a Nautilus or a Thresh or a Maokai. This is making their job easier. So Blitzcrank is really only good into enchanter supports like your Lux, like your Lulu, things like that, right? And also if there are a lot of tanks on the enemy team, like let's say you have a Scion in the top lane, you have a Galio in the mid lane, and then you have like an engager support. Blitzcrank is pretty much unplayable because you're literally gonna kill your team if you hook in one of those frontline champions. So that's bad. Leona, I've moved up from A plus to S tier because previously I thought YOLO Trap would have made her a lot weaker because she can't really use it. Turns out that even the YOLO Trap is a pretty good item. It's not that insane as I initially thought, right? It's not like you should be rushing YOLO Trap everywhere possible. In fact, a lot of champions no longer go for YOLO Trap, and it's mostly actually a Blitzcrank item. Some other champions like Nautilus or Rakan can build it as well, but it's not really a must build, right? It's not like insane of an item like I thought. So Leona is actually still amazing. And then we have a lot of the enchanter champions like uh like Karma, Milio, Soraka, and Yumi, all still really insane. I moved Rakan back up after he got that round of buff. I think it's in 6.0 C on his W cooldown, especially. He's gotten a lot better because of that. And I moved Janna back down because I actually don't think she's that insane compared to what I kind of envisioned. Also moved Nami back up because she's not as bad as I thought she was. And Seraphine goes to the top of the A plus tier because honestly, if you build full support maxing W, the heals and shields on Seraphine is pretty insane, as well as of course the insane teamfight ult. Just that I don't think she's on the level of the other enchanters that are above her. But with that said, that's pretty much going to be it for the tier list. Hopefully you guys enjoyed and learned from it. And thank you guys so much for watching the video, and goodbye.